You don't have a mic.
Come on, let's go. Let's get on. Hello, good morning.
Hi.
All right. Hi, guys.
We need a mic here. Hello.
No.
No.
There you go.
All right. Does it work? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm very happy to be here today to talk a bit about IoT and hardware because our panelists are specifically experts in hardware. So I am Eliane Fiolet. I am the co-founder of Ubergizmo, one of the top online media dedicated to consumer hardware and emerging technology based in the Silicon Valley. I co-founded the Ubergizmo over 10 years ago in Palo Alto, California. So just to give you a bit of context by numbers about IoT and hardware, we are 7 billion human beings on the planet, and as of 2014, there were 1.2 billion vehicles in the world. And that same year, 1.2 billion smartphones were sold. So talking about hype, for the longest time, Cisco has predicted that by 2020, we will have 50 billion connected devices on the planet. But recently, that number was revised down by Gartner, down to 20 billion. So we are here beyond the numbers. We are here to talk about what really is going on in the IoT and hardware, and what the future might look like, really, in that industry. So I will let the panelists introduce themselves very shortly, and I would like them, if you can give us a brief overview of the current status of the hardware.
Sure. Stop. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi. Hi, everybody. So my name is Barbara. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of the first venture capital firm dedicated to hardware startups. So we are helping the largest community of hardware startups in the world. We have 260 companies in 33 different countries. We're providing them support completely for free, and then we invest in some of them at seed stage mostly. So we're based in San Francisco, Paris, Taipei, and Tokyo.
And it's called Hardware Club.
And it's called Hardware Club, sorry.
Hi, Raph, Crouan, the co-founder, actually founder and managing director for Startupbootcamp, IoT. So you've seen quite a number of accelerators in the panel already from Techstars 500. We're one of the top guys as well. We have about 20 programs around the world. We help entrepreneurs going to market faster by connecting them to corporate partners, to investors, to mentors, and a group of other people that are interested in supporting them. And we are only vertical, so we're looking into specific industries from fintech to insurance tech to food tech to digital health. And of course, my remit is all about IoT and hardware particularly. Our program being based in London, in this particular case, is looking after having 10 companies every year. And we're in the middle of recruitment, so you can pitch me if you want. I'm happy to talk to you guys.
And he's nice to work with, actually.
Yes, of course. Do you want us to get on the trends?
So what's basically? Can you tell us what's the current status in hardware? Because we are here to figure out what's reality and what's hype.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you want? Okay.
Well, so we talked a bit about this earlier. I think a lot of people are looking at IoT as an enabler, and hardware is of course one of the key components of the Internet of Things revolution. We've seen in the past 5 to 10 years commoditization of the cost of sensors, so it's getting a lot more accessible and easier to integrate small sensors in any type of PCBs and product. Where about 10, 15 years ago, it was actually costing a lot of money to do a proprietary solution for each companies or even people that wanted to bring a product to market. Nowadays, for a fraction of that price, you can actually have a lot of data capture through small sensors in equivalent products. So it's one of those reasons why we talk a lot about hardware a lot more these days, particularly about smaller products. And that's the reason why the Internet of Things was the promise that, you mentioned the numbers at the end that were, Gartner's and Cisco thrown out a couple of years ago around the promise of IoT. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll go back to what it is that we're actually seeing today versus the reality, actually what's the reality behind the hype. So I'll go back to that in a minute, yeah.
Yeah, two things I want to talk about regarding the trends and where we're going right now. So basically, the new hardware revolution started 2007 with the iPhone, and then there's been a kind of a planetary alignment, and Raph was talking about it, the fact that you can develop for cheaper prices and very much more easily any hardware product. And so everybody was looking for kind of, this new piece of hardware that is going to create a lot of value. Because if you look at all the industrial revolutions that our civilization have been going through, there always been a piece of hardware. It has been a car, it has been a plane, then it came with the computer, the personal computer, the phone, and now everybody's kind of looking for the new piece of hardware. So that's why this trend, and everybody was getting like so crazy about the hardware, the IoT, and you were talking about Gartner putting those figures of about like 50 billion connected devices. And now they're reviewing it. I think one of the reasons is that because nobody knows exactly where we're going when it comes to the IoT. Everyone knows it's happening, but is it happening in the B2C space? Does it making more sense in the B2B space to happen? And this is exactly what we're experiencing right now, is that actually for the consumer to get access to all this data through the IoT, is not making that much sense, but for businesses to use this data and then to build better product for the final consumer, then it's making sense. So it's not that it's decreasing or it's not going to happen, it's just that the path that everyone thought that was going to be the B2C is not happening this way, and it's more the B2B going to the B2B2C. This is what we've been experiencing.
Okay, so and what big trends are you seeing right now in the IoT and hardware space? Do you have can you breakdown?
Okay. Can I actually just go back to the point before about in terms of numbers and what we see in the evolution of hardware? Because out of the we've helped about north of 500 startups around the world right now, and about more than 20% of those were hardware companies. And it is an increasing number of applications that we see in the hardware world. So it used to be quite an exception to have startups that are actually considering going into a hardware, because let's not lie to ourselves. Hardware is, it's more expensive, at least for the beginning of it. It's going to cost you more working capital to kick off the product, a physical device. Having said that, as I said, it's getting easier. So we see a lot more application going through the funnel. And the other thing is we also have a lot more ecosystem developed around that. And so, Hardware Club is a good example of that. That's been creating that incredible sort of community of companies that actually foster that innovation and help each other by leveraging best practices and exchanging ideas on how making your pitch. And having that, getting those guys supported from one another. So it is a growing trend, and the hardware has changed from what used to be a very complex industrial style, industry to, and it's still the case, of course, to something that's, a little bit more commoditized. So now we can go on the trends, I guess, right?
Yeah. So we, it's very interesting because we have this unique position because we've startups all around the world, and so we can see the trends and the cycle, and sometimes it's very curious and bizarre to see entrepreneurs, one based in San Francisco, the other one based in Hong Kong, and another one based in Israel, coming up with the same idea, and you're like, what's going on in the world? But that's another topic. But most of the trend we see right now, so there is a shift in the wearable tracker industry. So the components that were used were very on-the-shelf components, and so for us to buy trackers doesn't make any sense. So there is a new huge trend which we call the augmented human being, and it's mostly happening in the connected house. So meaning you will have devices that you can use at home that will help you cure from a disease. It's not medical devices; it's really in between medical and consumer devices, and there is a huge trend, and this is happening worldwide. Then we can go deeper in different topics, but we are super into the industrial IoT. So all the big industrials, they're looking for sensor they can put in their manufacturing plants or in the machine, listen to the machine, and to be able to monitor better, to use in a with better energy efficiency, their plants technology they're using and everything. So all the biggest industries around the world are looking for IoT product. They're not looking for the sensors, they're looking for the platform so they will be able to monitor the data. So this started maybe 2-3 years ago, and now this is happening right now. So smart building, definitely. Smart building, much more than smart home. And it's also about the topic than B2C or B2B2C. Smart home is about us building devices and putting them in our homes. Actually building 50 devices, I don't want my home to look like, I don't know, Best Buy or MediaMarkt or whatever. So it's not happening. And that's why the B2C is shifting, because people are not buying all those devices and they don't want to implement
Don't
themselves.
you think because, smart home has a huge potential, but right now consumers are not adopting it?
Yeah, because there is a huge need for the platform. I mean, you have two products, they don't talk to each other. And right now, let's be honest, there are three main players that are going to take over the smart home business, which are Google, Amazon, and Apple.
Yes.
And they are going
With
to
the
be
voice
the one.
activated speaker.
Exactly. And then, Google with the work business program, they're integrating with different devices and things like that. So this is what's happening in the smart home. And for me, this is not anymore a startup play. This is like a big, big groups play, integrating with different startups. But on the opposite, the smart building industry is very, very interesting, because it's more about, real estate promoters trying to put the sensors themselves directly in the buildings, so the consumer doesn't have to do anything. They just renting a space and everything is set up. So this is this shift and those main trends that we see. I can go on and go on. You can stop me. We can go into VR and AR as well and things like that, which is booming and crazy, and I think there are going to be a lot of news by the end of this year when it's come to VR and AR.
VR is really taking off.
Yeah.
My interest is can you just break down what's more important between industry, consumer IoT, or industrial IoT. I think the big money is in the industrial IoT, or even the not very sexy industry, which is the bulk of the business, is still in remote control of assets. Sure. And surveillance of assets. When it comes to smart building, is it the big money in energy saving? So just to give can you give us rapidly an idea of
So to differentiate the two, so the promise of the consumer home and actually the consumer IoT as a whole, either on the wearable side or on the smart home side, has been very much an early adopters market still, and hasn't been mass marketed because of various reasons. And one of the reasons that we discussed earlier before we went on the panel, which is the elephant in the room, is the security around it, right? A lot of people are still very worried about getting their home hacked, and there's been recent attacks, of course, in 2016 and a couple more that have been putting that as a reality on the table. Now, we all know how that works. We all know that most of the people are doing 1, 2, 3, 4 as a password, if there is even a password. So there's a lot to be done to educate people using those kind of devices to make it extra secure. As we discussed as well, it's at the core of the product that the security will come on board, right? And the more you get product security, the more you get traction around those particular devices, the more we'll have to be educated around that health. So that's one of the reasons why it hasn't picked up just yet. On the other side of the spectrum is the industrial internet that we just referred to. We're recruiting this year, 10 companies for our program, and we're primarily looking into industrial internet. And those areas are extremely, extremely important for us for two reasons. First, it's the best traction out there for now. It's the biggest revenue potential, because every single corporate out there are actually looking into enabling the digital technologies, and as you said, tracking their assets, having smart agricultural solution to enable, small devices to capture soil information to get better understanding of the water pollutions and stuff like that. Buildings we talked about extensively. There's also, smart energy, smart renting, smart energy. There is also smart sustainability, smart utility. There's tons and tons and tons of things. We invested last year in a company that does preventive maintenance, as you said, not very sexy. Preventive maintenance on an ingestion molding machine. It took them about 3 weeks to get funding, because everyone looked at this saying, it's simple, it's cheap, and it's going to save me $1 million. Why not invest in that, right? So it is instant traction, because the industry is eager to get that, and there's no barrier to entry as you would have in a consumer world. So it is a major trend right now. It's not going anywhere, it's actually increasing. And the difference, I'd say, in implementation is that there's a lot less cost to get to a market like this. There's a lot more potential buyers, but it is also something that we need to be very careful about, because customer adoption and the adoption of technology in the corporate world takes a lot longer. Mm-hmm. The product life cycle is shorter. The product buying cycle is a lot longer. So having those kind of products on on the hands of customers take a lot longer and takes a lot more capital for a startup to get there. So that's where we play, by connecting them to corporate and help them grow very quickly. And that's the industrial internet revolution. Not only Industry 4.0 that we see a lot in Germany or in other border countries, but also the industrial aspect of corporates trying to get digitalization of their assets.
So talking about money, can you give us an idea of the investment landscape? Who are the top investors and so on?
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
So basically, we are actually the only venture firm dedicated to hardware startups in Europe. There is no one else. So that's the landscape in Europe.
That's the landscape.
We do a lot of co-investment.
You are the landscape.
I mean, specialized, like just doing hardware and IoT stuff only. There are a lot of generalist VCs that we co-invest with, Partech, Iris Capital, Index, Passion, C4. So there are a lot of investors, even if they're investing in software as well, that do a little bit of hardware. If you look at the United States, it's not that crazy too. So you can count basically 20 expert fund doing hardware, and actually, in San Francisco, most of them are here. So we very few.
What about the corporate investors like Intel Capital or Qualcomm Venture?
They do invest a lot.
They are on the top.
Yeah, they invest mostly at Series B and Series C stage.
Later stage.
So the money is needed really at seed and Series A. And as Raph was explaining, there is a huge need of capital at the beginning when you're launching a company. And because especially in the B2B business, because they need a lot of money and they need cash in the bank account to get those contracts signed with the corporates. So you need a little bit more cash at the beginning, and then those companies turn out to be very profitable just after the Series A. Because what is very interesting when it comes to IoT is that you're selling a piece of hardware, which is most of the time right now very cheap to produce, so you're making a margin out of it. And then you have a business model with a recurring fee, and especially when you're in the industrial IoT. And so it means those startups, they need cash at the beginning, seed and Series A, but then they don't need cash most of the time to grow.
What you mean hardware is very cheap to produce? You mean like very simple devices? You don't mean a smartphone or?
No, of course.
A smartphone is not that expensive.
Yeah.
Robots are expensive.
Yeah, of course, robots with 20K a piece or even more.
Less,
$1 million
but,
or $1 million for one robot. Yeah. But I'm talking even smartphone. It's really the margin is not very high. It's very complicated to do.
Well,
so that's the beauty of hardware from the very beginning, and like talking about the computer, the phones and everything. That you produce this piece of hardware, and then it can be expensive, but still you have a business model which is basically making a margin out of it. If you don't, just give up. Just don't do it. It doesn't make any sense. And then on top of that, you can build content, platforms, so much value, and you have so many potential business model that it's a super profitable business once you figure out how to make money first with your hardware part and how to be profitable.
We got to be careful with that, because I partially agree on this.
Go ahead.
I'm a bit like what?
Yeah, the reality behind it is hardware is still expensive for sure, even though it's got commoditized a lot. And the commoditization actually helped, particularly in industrial internet, having not to reinvent the wheel. The Chinese manufacturing is spinning out millions of devices every year. They have on the shelf 10 times over what you can even try to dream of building out there, right? So there's no point in reinventing the wheel. When you try to create something that doesn't have a really high specific IP and a differentiators, don't do it. Just go to China, figure out there is something. Because if your company is only based on the IP of your product and it's a low IP, you're going to fail. There's no point in getting into the game, right? However, if you really have a product that's different, by all means, then you need that capital, and then come to us and talk. The value most of the time, particularly when we go back to B2B, is in the back end. Is the data, the analytics, the software, the AI you put in there and everything else. That's where you're going to get the value out of it, right?
Yeah, but it's the chicken and the egg,
You need the hardware to get the data, absolutely.
Okay, so we are almost
out of time,
so maybe for the last question, if you could give a piece of advice to a young entrepreneur who wants to actually start a startup and make a hardware product, what are the key challenges when it comes to create or develop your first hardware product as a startup?
I think the number one thing is you need to have the right skill set in your team. building a hardware product requires a lot of different kind of skills, and those are not things you're going to outsource, right? You need industrial engineering, you need your proper hardware engineering, you need electrical engineers, you need a variation of different things. Now, if you kick off your company, you're not going to have 20 people, but you need to have 2 or 3 very relevant type of professional around that space that have enough experience to get to that point. Most of the time what we see in those companies is you're lacking the marketing and sales experience, and that's fine, that's where we help and can help, yeah? But you need to have at least a basic skill set to be able to build a physical product. You cannot outsource that, so it's one of the advice I would give. Another one?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're looking at when we look at entrepreneurs that we are backing is mostly, first is the passion that they have. And it's, and I'm not saying that because everyone is saying that you invest, in people and especially at seed stage. But when you're building a hardware product, you really have to be crazy and you really have to, this ability to hold on and to want to make it happen, because you're going to face so many issues and so many troubles that you really need to focus and to be passionate about it.
Don't discourage them. It's still
No,
good
but
to
I
go.
mean, it's very important.
Is it true? Because I've heard another entrepreneur that 20 years in the hardware industry saying, your first product you will fail. Your first product is an experiment. And even like the big guys like Microsoft, it takes always them 3 iteration to make it right.
Yeah.
So can you tell the young entrepreneurs, don't be afraid, your first product will be...
I have example of entrepreneurs that didn't fail with their first product at all. At all, and are shipping like millions of units all around the world, and we back them and we're very happy. And they're super young at their first time entrepreneur. They started at 23 and now they're shipping devices all around the world. So it can happen, and it's just about being honest with yourself and knowing what you can do and cannot do. So I totally agree with Raph, which is basically when you're building hardware, it's very complicated because it's different from any other businesses. You have to understand the logistics, the production, the manufacturing, then the marketing, especially when you're in the B2C space, and then how do you deal with all those distribution network and things like that. So you need so many skills to build a successful company. You have to be aware of that and acknowledge that you cannot do everything. And so you need to surround yourself with a great team or to outsource some of it. Yeah. And if you know that and you're passionate and you have this this conviction that you want to make this product and put this product in the end of the consumer, then you can make it, even if you're a first-time entrepreneur.
Can I just say, if you're afraid of failure, don't be an entrepreneur. Right, that's the rule. You know you're going to fail at one point, so just get on it and embrace it.
Okay, so I think, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.